Hello. I have up on the screen here an excerpt from a story by Deborah Eisenberg called Some Other Better Otto. And this dialogue here comes near the beginning of the story. What we know going into this scene is that Otto is in his 60s. He's on the phone with his sister Corinne, who has invited him and their sister Sharon and their brother Martin to her house for Thanksgiving. We also know that Otto is gay. He's living with William, and his mother has died within the last year or two. I guess the best way to handle this, since I can't see when you have finished reading, is to have you pause this video until you finish reading this passage, and when you finished reading, press play again. Now that you've read this passage, oh, by the way, I've trimmed this passage from the original to make a point. But now that you've read it, you can see that this dialogue actually accomplishes a lot for the story. We can hear the voices of these two characters conversing. It reveals something about the characters speaking as well as about characters being spoken about. It furthers the plot, I suppose. It shows an instance even where a question is asked but not answered directly, or where a subject is changed, and that makes for really interesting dialogue. However, this well-written dialogue could be even better if some of the other techniques and tools available to fiction writers were integrated into it. The first thing I want to point out is even though there are only two characters talking here, it isn't always easy for the reader to keep track of who is saying what. So adding in some tags, at least every few lines, will help the reader to navigate. So this next page is the same exact scene of dialogue with the dialogue tags added as they are in the original. So this is better than what I showed you first because the reader has a few signposts. It's better, but it could be improved even more. How do the characters sound when they speak? Might there be some places to enhance the way the words are spoken? See how this tiny little addition of that pink highlighted phrase, "this time less cravenly," sweetens Otto's voice for us and adds a bit of tension to the moment because we feel him trying to adjust his tone. This makes the writing even better. However, as a reader here, right, these voices are kind of floating out in the ether. I don't know when this conversation is taking place, and I can't see where these characters are and what they're doing while they speak. There's no context. So here, I've reinserted some of the context from the original, adding at the beginning there that first light blue phrase, "when Corinne had called a week or so earlier about Thanksgiving," grounds the reader a bit into the previously unknown time and circumstances. And the brief addition of Otto's physical action down here at the second light blue insert there, this idly flipping through a magazine, not only shows the reader what he's doing while they speak, but it also provides some narrative tension because of his nonchalance in the face of Corinne's exclamation that comes just before it. So this is better, right? So, at the risk of sounding like a bad infomercial, yes, it's better, but wait, that's not all. So what if we take advantage of some of the other ways that experiencing this dialogue from Otto's point of view can offer the scene? I get it. You're probably saying phone calls are tough to write because the characters aren't even in the same room together. They can't even see each other. What difference does it make if the voices just float out there in dialogue land and this conversation that takes place over the telephone? I'm not trying to discount those kinds of questions that you're asking, right? I'm not saying that there's never a reason to present dialogue objectively on its face or to let the words speak for themselves, if you will. I'm merely trying to demonstrate that there are so many ways to add narrative tension and to make a scene more of dialogue more vivid by using other tools and techniques available to you as a fiction writer. So the trimmed down version of the scene that I originally presented allowed the reader to only hear the characters' voices, right? With only the words spoken, the point of view in that version of the scene felt objective or neutral. There was no character's internal thoughts, narratives, or perspective of what is seen, heard, smelled, tasted, felt. Therefore, the reader was a neutral observer or listener to these spoken words. The reader's left to his or her own devices to imagine the rest. But here, finally, we have the scene as published. It includes the tags, the physical actions, the internal thoughts, narrative, and exposition. Right? Pause the video and read through the entire scene. When you're done, press play. You'll have to do this twice because it continues on to 2 pages. So, taking advantage of all these tools available to the fiction writer, you can deepen the scene. It can serve a number of purposes. It could reveal how a character might have an agenda, doesn't say what he means or feels, hides things or lies, even if it's just to be polite. All of these nuances of the conversation are really difficult to reveal with the spoken words alone. So if you use this full arsenal of actions, internal thoughts, exposition, and narrative along with the dialogue, it will do wonders in showing what is being thought and what might have happened in the past, how these things either conflict with or contribute to what is being said and done. So it's going to add a huge source of narrative tension and interest to a scene. So here what I have on the screen now is another example of a scene from a published work that we can play with in the same way. This is a scene from chapter 2 of A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. Here, Benny, who works for a record label, is picking up his son Christopher from school in a yellow Porsche. We know that Benny has been adding gold flakes to his coffee in hopes of improving his sex drive, but it doesn't seem to be working. The 4th grader is skipping and happy until he climbs into the car with his father. Again, I've stripped away everything but the dialogue and the tags from the original scene to illustrate the point. Pause the video and read this dialogue. When you're finished reading, press play. Now look at this scene as published, with my highlighting added, of course. I've highlighted in blue the physical actions of the characters. In green are Benny's internal thoughts. In yellow is some exposition that reveals backstory and puts the instant scene into context. Feel free to pause the tape to read the complete scene. It spans 2 pages, so you may have to pause, and play again. So how might you put this into action in your own writing? Take a stretch of dialogue and consider ways you as a writer might expand or slow down the writing. and specific places where that expansion might take place. So brainstorm or do kind of a focused free write related to the scene that you've chosen. Consider the possibilities related to each of these tools, not just dialogue or what words are spoken by the characters, narrative of the action or a series of events, exposition, where you give the reader information with the intent to provide needed context for the dialogue, description, it could be physical description of the characters or physical description of the setting, as well as sensory details that immerse the reader in what the characters hear, smell, taste, see, and touch. And finally, the internal thoughts and feelings of the point of view character. Think about what expanding at the spot you've chosen might accomplish. First, you could consider just looking at opportunities or possibilities. As I've noted to many of you in my comments, I'm all about exploring possibilities. Save for later this decision about which possibilities you might try. First, just really try to keep an open mind. This is kind of a means of gaining control of that madman beast of an early draft that we all come up with, or many of us do, unless you're really, really lucky. Often there are places where the first draft is underdeveloped. Like these pared down versions of published works that I started with in this lesson. So the published versions that we worked toward here in the lesson are likely not a second draft, but a much later perfected draft. So I'm trying to help you sort of envision how to get from one to the other. This one way of examining opportunities and possibilities to expand and build on your initial draft. So this second longer draft that includes more possibilities, in the spirit of really playing with these kinds of writing and revision techniques, I encourage you to be open to all the possibilities. Think about what you could try. Some of your ideas you will decide not to try because they won't ultimately fit in with your overall intent for the entire novel. But some ideas will work great. Other ideas you may experiment with and wind up clipping. But it may be that you'll start with an underdeveloped passage, kind of like the ones that we started with, but you'll move to some intermediary overwritten passage that you're trying and experimenting with things. And then later you will go through it and weed out and save only the best parts to wind up with something great that's in between. I hope that you found this helpful. Feel free, if you'd like, to take a stab at this and post an initial scene and some brainstorming of ideas or questions you might ask to expand it or improve it. I'd be happy to talk about it or grab me during my office hours. Thank you very much. See you soon.